looks like you
Yeah,
got
I
it.
think, I'll even move it back.
Taser's even better, right?
Shoot him, explode against the chest or whatever.
Or else you can have a heart projectile, which will kind of knock the air out of them.
Yeah, maybe like a rubber bullet, right?
Yeah,
Well, let's start because I was gonna make you sing, but it's past the time. So I got the thing running, and I got the stuff going. So yes, I'd like to keep moving. Let's get out of 12. We're almost at the end of 12. Maybe I can finish it today. It's possible. So Jesus was asked to talk, or the Greeks wanted to see Jesus. And then we get this whole dialogue that is obviously to the Greeks. And then he disappears, which is very interesting too. It's a whole semeion. And then we get a conversation to the Jews. And these are to those basically who were not convinced of him. And we get the first quote, the quote about Isaiah. And here, let's see. So the first quote from Isaiah, I guess I probably should look at that really quickly. First quote from Isaiah. Oh, come on. In order that the logical argument and foretell Isaiah might be filled to individual capacity, who said, supreme in authority, a certain one was persuaded to the hearing of us, and the arm of the supreme in authority to whom has been uncovered, revealing what is hidden. And let's see, what is it? What's our translation from thing? That the saying of Isaiah the prophet might be filled, which he spake, Lord, who hath believed our report, and whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? And remember, these are not questions. There is. To whom, Timmy and Tis. So these are questions. Did I put a question mark on them? I should have put a question mark on them. I should have put a question mark.
You did up above, you did. I think you moved on by it. Go back.
Well, that was the King James.
Oh, you didn't put one. Okay.
These are question words. A certain one was convinced the hearing, and I'll just leave that as two together. But that is a question, and we went through the point there, and then there's a second one. Therefore, they could not believe. Let's see, here it is. Through it, they were not powerful to be persuaded, because anew said Isaiah, and here's where we are. He has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so they can neither see with their eyes nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, and I would heal them. All right, let's see what that. It's really interesting that we get very, let's just say there's a lot of poetic work going on with some of the translations. And this one should be really obvious, because this is very interesting in itself. Here's that word, has raised the smoke, darkened by smoke. That's the word usage specifically about the man born blind, used over and over and over again in that context. And it's, of course, this, if you got to remember, every quote from the Old Testament in the New Testament is from the Septuagint. It's a direct quote. So that's why the words are the words they're using. And it's interesting that Jesus used those same words, or John and Jesus used those same words in the scriptures. Of them, the eyes, and has made of stone, of them the hearts. And I'm just going to remind you that heart isn't really, okay, we know that the heart pumps blood. That's what it does. It's a very positive thing. However, in this era, they had no idea. They had no idea how the body systems worked at all. They had some concept, but not much. So the heart, when the word cardia is used, or cardian hearts, it means the effective center of the being and the capacity for moral preference. You know, we use the same term as a figure of speech in English, the heart, right? But we also, I think we're negatively affected by empiricism, because remember, the empiricists won. the reason the empiricists won is because we let them, and we should have never let them, because it's better if you use logic and reason, or you use reason and empiricism to prove things in the world. Because if you use just empiricism, then you get pure idiocy, right? People today say, well, there is no God because I can't see him. Well, I can't see thoughts. I can't see your mind. I can't see your emotions except what's on your face. I can't see a lot of things. Gravity, beautiful. I can't see math, really, right? Mathematics is purely something that we use symbolically. I can't see these things, so they don't exist, right? Yeah, they don't exist. They're just false. They're just made up. Empiricism is a real problem, I think, in the modern world, because children today believe stuff that is that no one in the past would ever believe, because they're not able to reason. So anyway, so the heart, the effective center of our being, capacity for moral preference and volitional desire and choice, it's not really the same as pneuma. Boy, you know, this starts getting really complicated, right? Even in our own brains, because it's not pneuma, which is free will, but it's free will. The words are different. The Greeks would say that where is your pneuma? In your heart. We would say, where's your pneuma? It's in your brain, right? But we know that brains are where you're supposed to be thinking. We're supposed to be thinking. Anyway, in order that not only they may stare at to the eyes, and they apply mental effort to reach a bottom line conclusion. This is a really interesting word. Neil says they apply mental effort needed to reach bottom line conclusions to the heart, the affection of the being, and they turn around, and I will heal them. This is this word, turn around. In Hebrew, more even than in Greek. In Hebrew, to repent or change your path. The word tin hodos means the way. Christians were never called Christians until later at Antioch, and they were called Christians by the Greeks because the Greeks called mysterions after their god or their leader. And so the Christian mysterion was called Christian by the Greeks. But what did they call themselves all through the whole New Testament? The way, tin hodos, yeah. And they got that from Malachi. It's not just Malachi. The word that means to repent in Hebrew means to turn in your way and go the other way, basically. I'm being too wordy, but the word in Hebrew means to go the other way in a row. And tin hodos literally means the way in Greek. So it's interesting that this word, they turn around, which, what does that mean? That means to turn around in what they're doing. Here's, you notice this is what 2 lines? And we got a translation that's like around 5 lines. He has raised the smoke, hence darkened by smoke their eyes, and has made stone of their hearts, in order that they might not stare at with eyes, and they not apply mental effort needed to reach conclusions to the heart and the capacity of moral preference. And they turn around, and I will heal them. What is very important about this is, do you remember what Jesus said? The Pharisees that were Jesus' Pharisees said, are we blind? His answer was, yes. You notice what this says from Isaiah. We read this just like the translator. He had blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their heart, and be converted, and I should heal them. What did Jesus tell us about those who cannot see? They can hear his word, his voice, his word. They can hear his voice and know his voice. So although this looks really horrific, doesn't it? This pronouncement by Isaiah looks really terrible, because it looks like it's telling us that God blinded their eyes and hardened their heart. literally says he raises smoke, they're blind, right? And he hardened their hearts so that they, in order they might not stare at with eyes and not apply mental effort to reach the conclusions of the heart, the capacity of moral preference. If they turn around, I will heal them. In other words, if they do what? Yeah, hear my voice. Hear me. So, do you see how, okay, now I've told you before, I'll repeat this because this is really important. Hebrew is probably, well, it's next to Japanese, it's the most euphemistic language in the world. Okay? So, can you see how this could be translated in many, many different ways and get kind of different things out of it, right? Now, I haven't parsed, I have done Hebrew, but I'm not considering myself a Hebrew scholar, but I know a lot about the way Hebrew works. And you can see in the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew, it's a lot more, what's the word, wishy-washy, not where I really want, but you know, it has multiple meanings, right? And the meaning that we get out of it, obviously, is very positive from what Jesus told us. Are you blind? Yeah, you're blind. You're blind. But what? You can hear the voice. You can hear my name, right? Which is really a huge deal. So I think it's interesting because when we read the translation, we get this impression that God has made everybody, you know, harden their hearts. They can't ever receive salvation, right? But what is he really saying? Listen, listen, listen. You don't remember what the Greeks said. We would like to stare at him, optimos. We want to stare at Jesus, right? And Jesus' answer to them was about the same. What did Jesus say? You don't need to see me. You need to listen to me. I think this is a very, this goes back, I think, very strongly to the concept of sark, suke, and pneuma. Because suke, remember, is thinking. But what puts the power of thought into the world? The ability to use your free will to what? Think about the right things. Isn't that what you tell your kids? I think about this all the time. You know, I got grandkids hanging around the house. You know, it's not so much that they're not thinking. They're always thinking. It's just you want to move their thoughts in the right direction, right? And you say that's true about older kids and about yourself too, right? Because what do we want to do? We want to sit and be, sometimes you want to sit and be lazy when you got a lot of work to do, right? And really, we should be working, but I don't know, we have more time than any other society, and yet, you know, with kids, I don't think I ever said I'm bored to my parents. My mom would have probably said, okay, you're bored, go clean the toilets, you know, right?
Let me help you out.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the word meant.
I know. I mean, I
don't think it ever came up.
I was so happy as a kid to have free time because it meant I could go and read. Man, I read until my eyes were, you know, they always say I never had to have glasses, but, you know, maybe that's good. You should be reading. But anyway, as a kid, I just loved to read. And I was so happy when I could go read, right? Anyway, but today, you know, you got my grandkids, you know, 4-year-old says, I'm bored. All right, help me clean the toilets. We'll work on this. Anyway, I think it's really interesting. So this is beautiful. And here, I've got a note on this that I think is important for us to look at. This is a stated telos in a quoted wrapper. And by the way, this is the way you write technical papers. If you haven't had to write a technical paper in a long time, I've written enough for you, okay? But what you do in a technical paper is you make some statement, right? You say, I did this experiment, and then you quote afterwards something that proves or supports what you have. I do that all the time in the things I show you. I'll show you, evidence from historical documents and papers and other things that prove what I'm telling you. This is exactly what John is doing here. So he said, the stated telos is not as obvious. Well, I think it's obvious. It's listen. You don't need to see to understand. Yes, sir.
Well, just thinking back to John's opening statement of this whole book, in the beginning was the Word, not the sight, not the image of, but the Word, the sound that you hear. So,
And I'll let you
back to the circle there.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but I'm going to put it in context. The word is logos, right? In the beginning was the logical argument. Why we want to translate this beautiful Greek word into word when there's actually another word specifically for word, right? Because logos means logical argument. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, I agree with you 100%.
But you hear the logical argument. You don't see the logical argument. You hear it.
Bingo. Yes. I think that. Yes. John and, okay, I'm going to give you a telos, right? I should be giving you a telos, but I'll give you a telos. In the whole of this book is the late gospel, is the latest gospel, probably written around 90 AD. So the people, I'm trying to show you that he's writing to the Greeks and Romans, and most of the Greeks and Romans did not see Christ and did not see his resurrection. They know of it. They heard it. And so John's message, his unstated telos, that's actually kind of stated, right? He doesn't tell you this. He shows you this through the whole book. You can be like the man born blind and never regain your sight, but yet you can be convinced of Christ. That is the beautiful message, the beautiful gospel to all of us Gentiles, all of us, the Greeks and Romans. Can you imagine how positive this was in their world? Anyway, I think it's very important. This is effectively the gospel. To stare at it and use mental effort to understand, which leads to turning around repentance and the cure for sin. Jesus being the idea to see and hear. I should put that in there too. To understand. I think this is probably effectively, that part. Let's see, where's that word? I always put these words in here. Yeah. Strefo, turn, transition, to convert by changing, switching direction, go the other way, making an opposite divergent course. Literally, it doesn't have the same connotation that it does in the Hebrew, or a similar word in the Hebrew, because that means to repent. But this, obviously, right, is, by this time, they had to be very cautious. In Mark, especially, we see a lot of references to teen hodos. And when we have a reference to teen hodos, I'll point it out to you. But they couldn't use the term teen hodos at this time very easily. Why?
They were thrown out of the synagogue.
Yeah, they're being persecuted. Your history teachers forgot to tell you about Suetonius. But according to Suetonius, Nero Caesar was purging all the Mysterions out of Rome. And the reason that Nero did, was because of Christus. And Suetonius mentions Christus, and in Luke, Suetonius is mentioned by Luke as kicking the Christians out of Rome. Well, we know he was kicking all the Mysterions out of Rome, but he was specially focused on the Christians, on Christus and the way. So by this time, the persecutions had become pretty intense. And we know that because what were they doing to the Christians in this period? Fox's Book of Martyrs. Everybody read it, right? I read it with my kids. Fox's Book of Martyrs there were two books that were the most popular books in America. Almost every family owned them until books became more ubiquitous. They had a Bible first, and then they had a Fox's Book of Martyrs. Fox's Book of Martyrs is a great book, and my kids used to call it the murder book because, it talks about the Christians who were killed. Martyrs in Christianity are not those who kill other people. They're those who die because of their faith, which I think is kind of interesting that the Islamofascists call martyrdom, killing others. Well, whatever. That doesn't seem right to me. Anyway.
I think you've told us in the past that strafeo or whatever.
Uh-huh.
That was a marching term, or had to do with the troops marching and they would change direction? Or?
Yes, I think you're right about that. And there are a lot of Greek terms that are, there are a lot of Roman terms. We don't get, this is not a Roman term, but there are a lot of these terms that do apply in a military. But it's probably the stronger one is optimalio or optio, because optio is the term that Jesus uses when he calls Peter. And he calls him literally to be his optio, which is the centurion's right-hand man. And I asked the question back when we were looking at Matthew, does this mean that Peter was in the military, in the Roman, or was he, maybe working on the galleys, or, we don't know the back. We want to know, right? But we don't know the background of these guys. And it's really interesting because they're, we have the impression maybe they're 30. We don't know how old they were. No idea. But, some of them seem older than others. They have background. And Peter was married, which means he was probably around 30 or so in their society. This stuff is, there's so much depth in this. I don't believe there's anything as AI. You mean the first pope was married? What's that? The first pope was married. I wouldn't doubt it. The unmarried, Christians, priests, whatever, Orthodox marry, the priests marry. The only guys that don't are the Catholics, which is really interesting. Anglican priests marry. We don't call our guys priests, kind of Irish, but they marry. The only ones who don't are the Catholics. Boy, they have more problems than. Yeah. Where'd they have them?
Yeah, that'll work for you.
Here's some Isaiah. I won't read the whole thing, but remember this is rabbinic context. Maybe I should read part of it. This is where he touched his mouth, touched his lips with the thing. I heard a voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here I am, send me." And he said, "Go and tell his people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with the ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed." And we know that this in the Septuagint and the Greek is very different than our translation. You see what they did, right? You know what they did? Just some translation history, because you may not know this. People have this really peculiar idea that stuff was translated and translated and translated. Well, it really wasn't. However, when Jerome put together the Vulgate's the Latin version of the New Testament and Old Testament. When he did that, when he put the Vulgate together, what did Jerome understand, and what did he use for his basis for his translation of the Old Testament? Yeah, he used Septuagint. The reason he had reasons for doing that, because all the quotes in the New Testament are from the Septuagint. So why not? And plus, okay, yes, people are multilingual, but he didn't. Number one, Hebrew was a totally dead language in the time of Christ. Aramaic could not be written very well. Aramaic had an issue. Aramaic didn't have any vowels. Hebrew has no vowels. So what they did is they took the Arabic vowels pointlets and put them into together with the Aramaic and the Hebrew to give you your vowels. There are issues. But the scholars of Hebrew were Jewish. And they really, when you say Hebrew scholars, if you can't write it and you can't read it without being memorized, you have a problem? Yeah. That's one of the reasons that Greek was so popular, is because eventually people could read it without memorization because it gets really kind of complicated. But the big deal is that they were translating for years from Septuagint sources until Marty and Calvin and King James, when they translated the Old Testament, where did they go? They went back to the Hebrew. They got some, by that time, the vowel pointlets, you have the Masoretic texts. They were at 800s when the Masoretes put the pointlets into Aramaic and Hebrew. Cool, can't read in the synagogue, but it was great because you could read it, and they started separating the words just like the Greeks were doing about the same period or earlier. So you're happy, right? Everything, you could read stuff and you could study stuff, and you could actually take the Hebrew text and translate it. So they were using Hebrew in translations for the translations that Martin Luther and Marty did, that Calvin did, that these people were doing. And so what happened? What happened? The Septuagint is Greek. Greek is concrete. Hebrew is very euphemistic. You got a problem here. How are you going to translate it? You're going to translate it super euphemistically. You're going to translate it super concretely. Go to the Septuagint, right? But they noticed there were differences. There's differences in the way the Septuagint handles the text compared to the Hebrew. It's complicated. Yes, sir.
In order to understand the Hebrew, you have to understand the culture.
Right, and the context.
And the context.
Yeah.
So like my Bible was an RSV, and they translated the Old Testament from the Hebrew, which is a problem because they failed to use the cultural context. So they translate a young maiden to a young maiden rather than a virgin.
A virgin. Yeah, Bulutha, something like that. Yeah.
And it's absolutely positively should be a virgin.
Yes. Yes. You're absolutely right. And people pull that out. When I've talked to groups, I mention that specifically as an evidentiary point of a translational problem. And you know what? People that think they're really scholar-aided, right, will pull that out and say, look, and it's like, yeah, but the Septuagint says Parthenon. What's a Parthos? What's a Parthenon? Parthos means virgin. So in the Septuagint, in the LXX, they knew culturally exactly what to translate. But yeah, Beulah in Hebrew means a young woman because the presumption is she was, either before marriage age or marriageable age, but not married. Right? So therefore a virgin. Culturally, that's why, by the way, I tell you I don't tell you all the time, but I should remind you all the time, what I'm doing is a cultural translation. That's why it sounds kind of funky, right? Strange in our ears, because I'm not trying to translate it for a modern English audience. I'm trying to translate it so you understand what the Greeks were thinking. Yes, sir.
Who do we think wrote or translated the Hebrew into the Septuagint? Was it Greeks or was it Hebrews that knew Greek?
Oh, that is a great question. And the thing is, LXX means, LXX, 70. It means 70. Supposedly there were 70 scholars that were all rabbis in the school of
Alexandria.
Alexandria. Yes, the school of Alexandria, who translated the Septuagint. It took them a long time. I think it's 250 when they finished their translation, BC, 250 BC when they finished the translation. And the thing about Alexandria is, okay, I'm not meaning to jaundice you, but Alexandria is considered on the schools of the 4 schools of Judaism. Where is Alexandria? Well, I mean, in the sense, you're right, it's Egypt, but where are they on the
ranking system?
The ranking of, okay, who is the most illiberal, the most, the worst?
Oh, the worst.
The worst one. Well, we would say Jesus said they're the worst. The ones that said, if I want to divorce my wife for walking in with dog poop on her shoes, or burning my supper, or burning my soup, which group was that? I may get it mixed up, but that was the school of Jerusalem. I believe that's correct. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the school of the Galil. Anyway, the Galil or the Jerusalem school were considered the worst, right? And that's why they kept trying to trick Jesus by asking him those questions. Can a man divorce his wife for any reason, right? And since he was from the Galil, the school of the Galil, I believe, would have said, yes, you can divorce your wife for any reason. And there was other questions they asked him that we say are esoteric, but they were very important to the Jews at the time. The school that was the most liberal school was the school of Alexandria. And we know this. Remember when we studied Hebrew, if you were in the Hebrew class, and one of the big deals of the Hebrew class, remember Paul, this is really interesting, but Paul told them, Paul said, is it okay to eat meat sacrificed to idols? Paul said, yeah.
As long as you don't cause someone else to sin.
That's right. As long as you don't cause your neighbor to sin, basically don't throw up, don't question, right? So if somebody invites you over for dinner or for Eucharist, don't ask the question, where did the meat come from? Where did the lamb come from? That was Paul's solution. What was the school of Jerusalem's solution?
Absolutely not.
School of Jerusalem said, do not eat meat sacrificed to idols. The Jerusalem school in 70 AD, where did they go? Well, they mostly went to one place. We know historically. They went to Alexandria. They couldn't go to Babylon because that's the Parthians. They weren't going that way. Where they went was Alexandria. We know a large number went to Alexandria. In Alexandria, they found a Hebrew temple. In that Hebrew temple, what were they doing? Josephus says they were sacrificing meat to God. They were sacrificing animals to God in the sacrificial process. What does Hebrews say? Don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. Don't participate in the temple worship there. Don't participate in the other worship. But it does say, invite the people into your home and talk about Jesus with them. Very interesting message. This sounds like the Jerusalem school, doesn't it? The Christian Jerusalem school. That's why when we studied Hebrews, I told you Hebrews is the antithesis of Paul. Paul said, yeah, eat meat sacrificed to idols. If Paul were around, what would our Eucharist be?
A Seder.
Yeah, it'd be a Seder meal with lamb. I kind of like that idea. But because he lost, and basically this is historical stuff. Where was the peak of, where did Christianity really make its history in the beginning? North Africa. Yep, North Africa and the Levant. The Levant was huge in North Africa, and it slowly moved. The Orthodox were the move. They moved into Byzantium, and then finally into Rome. They took over pretty much. They moved throughout Europe, but their real start was there in North Africa. And so in North Africa, we find That's where Alexandria is, right? That's where all the things are. That's why the Septuagint had so much power, and that's why John Chrysostom in about 300 AD finally had to figure out a way to unite Christianity, because some of the Christians were for Paul and some were for Apollos, right? Some were for the Hebrew Alexandrians and some were for the Romans. And so he did what? He developed the Mass. He developed the Eucharistic Mass. If you look at John Chrysostom's Mass, it's also the Mass they do almost, it's like 2 hours long, okay? It's what they do in the Orthodox Church. Almost every Orthodox church. We do the exact same Mass. What do? We do the same thing the Catholics did. We cut it about half, and then we cut it again. So our Mass does not last 2 hours. Catholic Mass may last an hour or so. Our Mass, a part of our whole thing, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, maybe a little longer. It depends, but it's really interesting. The closer you get to Orthodoxy, the longer the Mass lasts, the more they follow John Chrysostom's direct Mass. But anyway, this is, is this important? Yeah, it is important. Because people ask, well, don't you ask all the time? How do we go from a Seder to having bread and wine? Now, people point to the Jesus instituting the Last Supper, but what were they doing at the Last Supper?
Seder meal.
They're eating a Seder meal,
They
yeah.
sent them early to prepare the meal.
Well, it depends on who you're looking at. In John, when we get there, we're going to see that John, and we know this, the question is never asked. Well, it is asked in the modern era, but it wasn't asked very much. There are 5 sects of Judaism. There's Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, Zealots, and Teen Hodos. We're Teen Hodos. Was Jesus, remember I told you, he probably looked like a Pharisee. He's a rabbi, right? Pharisaic rabbi. He's not a Sadducee. He's not a priest. He wasn't a zealot. He wasn't fighting the Romans with an iron sword. But the big question is, was he an Essene? And by the way, Jesus has his Seder and his Passover on the proper day required by the Old Testament. The rabbis early moved the Passover to Friday. Why did they do that? For business, that's right. They moved it really early in the history, in the Mishnah and the Talmud. In the Old Testament Torah, we studied the Torah. It told you to have the Passover on a certain day, and it would move. It would move in during the week. And so it wasn't always supposed to be pegged to the Shabbat, to Friday. So, Friday, Saturday. So, because Shabbat begins at sundown on Friday to sunset on Saturday. So the Seder, the Passover, they were supposed to sacrifice the lambs by the late account, by the ruling of the rabbis on Friday, and then eat it on Saturday. But if it happened on Thursday, what would happen?
You'd wind up being closed for 2 days.
Yeah, you'd end up getting rid of your commerce for 2 days. So the rabbis really early said, we're going to move the Passover to always be on match with Shabbat.
Like moving holidays to Mondays, so you don't.
Yeah, well, it's like moving holidays to Friday or Monday, right? So that you can have a 3-day weekend. They did it really early in the history of Jerusalem for commercial reasons. If you're an Essene, though, when do you have your Passover?
On the day that it's determined by the calendar.
On the day it's supposed to be. And what's really interesting is that the Sanhedrin that did not follow the Mishnah still followed the Pharisaic idea. Isn't that interesting? Wonder why they do that. Probably because they had more participation, right? This is really deep stuff historically. And whatever. I've mentioned it in here before. We've gone over this stuff before specifically. Yeah, and here's a footnote. I left footnote on this. Hebrew Septuagint. You will be ever hearing but never understanding. You'll be ever seeing but never perceiving, as people's hearts become callous and hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. And remember, we looked at the Septuagint directly through the gospel, through John. Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. That's a stated pointing out to us. These things Isaiah when he saw his glory and spake of him. And then here is the translation. These, said Isaiah, that are because he stared at the doxin, what evokes good opinion of him, and elacid. He didn't logically, he uttered words through all over of him. These, said Isaiah, because he stared at that which evokes good opinion of him, and he uttered words through of him, all over of him. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. But because of the Pharisees, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Out of doors.
Out of doors, yes. Nevertheless, among the chief rulers also many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. Almost at the same time, indeed, and from out of among of the first archeton, many often they were convinced, epistean. They were convinced of the logical argument to or into him. Other things that is contrariwise through the Pharisees, no or not, homologum. They were making the same logical argument with the same telos, an argument with the same telos, in order that not or less away from the synagogue led together, they might be caused to be. Yeah, unfortunately, this doesn't say out of doors, but that's my favorite, right? Our favorite, kicked out of doors. But what's really interesting is this word homologum. They were making the same logical argument. Let's see what the translation together is. Indeed, though, however, at the same time, and out from among the first, many were convinced of the logical argument in him. Contrariwise, through the Pharisees, they were not making the same logical argument in order that they may not be caused to be away from the synagogue. So, in other words, the leaders, those that were in power, were in agreement with Jesus, but they didn't say the same logical argument because they didn't want to be kicked out of the synagogue. They didn't want.
It's political.
It's political, yeah. I think The Chosen shows this really well because it shows the different factions, that were kind of contending with each other. Now, is there hope? Yeah, there is hope. In fact, we see of these first, right, the really famous ones that we're going to see in John. Nicodemus. Whoa. Nicodemus. He was a silent and quiet supporter and disciple of Christ. And we're going to see him more. I think, isn't Joseph of Arimathea, whether he's in this John or not, I can't remember. But Joseph of Arimathea was another leader of the people that was. And this homologeo, together in legeo, to voice the same conclusion or agree. What a cool word. The Greeks, if you, the credo, I think it's a credo. I can't remember which one. It's one of the 5 final dialogues. It's in my book, The Second Mission. I have a translation of it, but they're arguing about words, and they argue that the Greek is the perfect language because the Greeks would say that their language is completely logical, and that all you got to do to make it, to fix a word or make a word even more better is you put a prefix or a suffix on it, and you're set, right? So, and you know that because you used to have to take the SAT and the ACT tests, right? And you know that's how it works. I hope you know that, but anyway, you didn't forget that. This is important stuff. For they loved human praise more than praise from God. This is really interesting. They loved the praise of men. This is probably better. Egapacin. They loved of the gods, assigning a reason that which evokes doxin of man face of humans more than and perhaps indeed the doxin of a god. And let's see. This is a really interesting statement. Assigning a reason, they loved of the gods. They didn't love like the gods. They loved of the gods that what evokes good opinion of men more than all that evokes good opinion of the God. Kind of different than the translation we get, but you can see a similar kind of idea, right? But what's really interesting is they didn't use the word phileo. They used the word agape, right? They loved of the gods that what evokes good opinion of men more than all that evokes good opinion of the God. This is a really damning kind of thing against these people, because it means that they loved of the gods, that their love for men, for the opinions of men, see, the doxa of men was greater than their desire for the doxa of God. Yes, sir.
Previously you talked about the love of the gay.
Yeah.
But he doesn't say that here. He says of the gods.
It makes it very strong. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like saying, what were you worshiping? What are they worshiping?
All the various gods.
Well, they're worshiping specifically the honor of men, the doxa of men, the glory of men, right? So, wow, that's an ugliness. So, this probably is the worst, thing that Jesus could say to you, right? Because do you have any hope? Not unless you fix something, right? Seriously fix something. Because Jesus, look, it's about the logos. It's about the word. It's about what is spoken, what is said. But if you're not saying Jesus' message, where are you? You're loving man's glory more than you are God's glory. This is...
Look at some of the churches today where they're more interested. They don't want to preach the word. They want to, because it may alienate them from the world.
Yep. It might not make as much money in the till, right? Yeah. I'll take the health and welfare gospel before I'll take some of the other gospels, just saying, at least health and welfare gospel, you're making money to help others, and hopefully you believe that God is blessing you, so you're blessing God, right? But the other side of the coin is the honor of men and the gods as opposed to the honor of God. Anyway, I think this is really an important point. And Jesus cried out, "Whoever believes in me does not believe in me only, but also the one who sent me." Jesus cried out and said, "He that believes on me believes not on me, but on him, he that sent me." Jesus, but he cracked and he screamed like a raven and said, the piston, he being convinced to or into me, no or not, convinces to or into me, all things contrariwise to or into he having sent me. But Jesus screamed like a raven and said, that he being convinced into me convinces not into me, contrariwise into he having sent me. Whoa! This is a direct statement about those who are, loving the doxa, the glory of man, Jesus said, he being convinced into me convinces not into me, but into he having sent me. This is really a big deal because the big point of this is, okay, what's the serious sin or the serious badness of those who are in the leadership? They're convinced, right, of Jesus, but they're not doing what? They're keeping quiet so it doesn't convince others. Look at what it says. He being convinced into me convinces not into me, but into he having sent me. In other words, when you say, I'm part of Jesus, I'm convinced of Jesus, I love Jesus, I'm into Jesus. Who are you then convincing others of? Not just Jesus, but the one who sent Jesus, who's God. And look, we're going to get a whole nother statement. The one who looks at me is seeing the one who sent me. All right, this is very deep. And he that seeth me seeth him that sent me, and he gazing on me, he gazes on he having sent me. And he gazing on me, gazes on he having sent me. What did Jesus just say?
He said he's God.
He said he's God. It's not just you're being convinced and you're convincing others of God, but looking at me, to stare at me. So when the Greeks said we want to stare at Jesus, you are staring at God. Yeah, it's really funny. It's really funny to me. What, that Dan Brown guy? Dan Brown's a nut, but his thing, Jesus never said he was God. Dude, what kind of Greek are you reading? Is there something wrong with your brain? Because it does. Maybe he's getting his translation from, the NIV and King James without looking into what the words say. Just say it.
Just didn't say the telos. That's the telos.
I agree. The part of our problem, right, is we don't understand Greek very well. Hopefully we're understanding it even better. But it's always the telos. That thing that they made you read the Greek dialogues and you go, what? It's because the telos is unstated. It's always unstated in a Greek dialogue. This is a Greek dialogue. Wow, an unstated telos. This is direct, yes. Direct. This is another direct statement of deity. I have come into the world as a light. Correct that. Well, how come it says? The spelling checkers are so great, aren't they?
They give you the wrong word.
Annoying.
Well, they'll fix it. You wouldn't believe Tammy won't tell you her story, but what her thing corrected her thing to her message to her daughter. That was really funny. I have come into the world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. Okay, this goes back to the previous one. Goes back to the very beginning of John. I have come a light into the world that whosoever believeth on me should not abide in darkness. This is huge. Ego, phos, a light. Tour into the cosmos. I have come or gone in order that all of the whole, he having been convinced, tour into me, into the darkness, not a lace, should stay. I, a source of light, have come into that which was created in order that all the he, being convinced, into me, into the darkness, should not stay. This is huge. This goes back to the beginning of John. This is all that stuff about the light. If anyone hears my words but does not keep them, I do not judge that person. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. Actually, this is a little bit different in the Greek. you can guess, and look how long it is. And if any man hear my words and believe not, I judge him not, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. And in case that a certain wonder thing of me, it is heard of the utterances of me, not a lace, I will preserve, guard by having an eye, referring to vigilance of shepherds. Here's another ego. I, know or not, do distinguish him, know or not, assigning a reason, I came or went off in order that I will distinguish the cosmos, all other things, in order that I might deliver out of danger to safety the cosmos. This is kind of different than our translation. Let's see what it says in the Greek here. And in case that if a certain one or thing has heard my utterances and will not preserve by having an eye. This refers to those that are in power, that are convinced of Christ, right? But they won't speak, they won't confess, right? Having an eye, I'm referring to the vigilance of shepherds. I do not distinguish him. Assigning reason. I cannot, in order that I will distinguish thee that which was created, contrariwise, in order that I might deliver out of danger and into safety thee that which was created. Okay. Jesus said he didn't judge them. I don't distinguish him. What distinguishes that person?
Belief in Christ.
Well, I'd go even further. It's the cosmos. What's the problem with the cosmos? Well, there is no problem with the cosmos per se, right? But what's the problem with the part of man in the cosmos? Sin, right? Sin. Does Jesus have to judge you?
No, judgment's already
Yeah.
given. Sin is sin, and you've judged yourself by committing sin.
All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I mean, that's a quote, right? The big deal is that Jesus doesn't have to judge you. God doesn't have to judge you. The judgment isn't for the sin, right? If you sin, what's the answer? You're done, right? That's it. But the judgment is that I'm going to give you lenience. I'm going to save you. I'm going to protect you. Jesus says here that he came not to judge because you're already judged. What did he come to do? To save. Yeah, and not just save you, but save what?
The whole creation.
The whole of creation. Yeah, this is really important stuff. And the problem with the people in the creation, if we are, his point is that if you hear the message, you're going to be convinced. There's no way you can't be convinced because this is the message from God. So the answer is, if you're convinced, and God would say you're convinced because you're part of the creation. You just are. So therefore, if you're unwilling to speak out into the creation, I can't help you. That's what he's saying. I can't help you. I'm going to save the creation, but I can't help you because you're what? Your brain, you're not choosing, you're not, you're whatever you're convinced of, you're not doing the right thing, right? Even if you're convinced of it, you're not doing it. You're not part of it, right? And what he wants to do is make you part of it. He wants you to have buy-in. He wants you to have stock. Buy the stock in Jesus, right? Buy stock in Jesus and tell everybody, I got stock in Jesus.
It's a great investment.
Great investment. Yeah, modern example. But yeah, I love this kind of thing. Anyway, thank you, Father, for your word. Pray you look after this week. In your name we pray. Amen. Almost got to the end. We'll finish up with
Judgment of sin is death.
Yeah, really.
well, eternal death,
Kind of costly.
which is even worse, right?